I think that frustration isn't technical frustration, but probably perceptual failure. The ability to see discrete forms of a new kind, or new kinds of forms, in new data is a human ability that varies like any other human ability. The ability to remember things, the ability to articulate things verbally, the ability to learn foreign languages efficaciously. Okay, so the ability to look at new data where important new evidence of life is located on a foreign planet, is something that the individual person or individual people don't possess the same level of skill to do. There are people who, just like there are people who have phenomenal memories, there are people who are keenly perceptive. And likewise, just as there are people with terrible memories, they can't even remember what they ate for lunch yesterday, there are people with terrible perceptual skills. What is invalid is to say, because I can't see what you see, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Because that puts the onus of perception on the worst percipients, the worst perceivers. And we don't use that standard in any other area of science. We don't say, for example, because the common person, the layperson, can't understand the mathematical formulae that are used to describe advanced new discoveries in physics, the discoveries haven't been proved. They are deemed to be proved if the peers of those physicists decide that the data, or that the formulae describe the breakthroughs in physics that the discoverer alleges have been achieved. So what was invalid, what has been invalid, that's been going on the internet regarding both technical frustration and perceptual frustration regarding my data is, one, there is no standard of computer technology that everybody can agree to the very image that's being imaged. In other words, the images themselves vary because the technologies vary. And two, the ability of people to look at that data and see what the percipients see is not available to some people. Some people can't see the data. They can see the data if they're sighted, but they can't make sense of the data and say, aha, I see the plesiosaur, or I see the humanoid, or I see the grotesque humanoid skull that you're pointing to.
Do you think that might also have to do with What the Bleep? Have you seen What the Bleep? Do we know?
I don't believe that it's a question of quantum fluctuation at the level of subatomic organization. I believe it's being driven by some things like the fact that I had specialized training by the U.S. Navy in perception when I was in Pegasus, and I'm also the person who extracted the data and wrote about it and decided how the photos would be enlarged, how they would be captioned, what text would be used to illustrate them. And so I'm familiar with what's there because I've studied it for several thousand hours. And I studied it for several thousand hours as someone who had been trained in childhood to be an observer, to be a trained observer by the U.S. Navy itself. Okay, so I'm a very good perceiver of things. I'm capable at, or very capable at pattern recognition. But I'm still amazed at how, for example, I'll show somebody the photograph of the grotesque humanoid skull, and they'll just see a rock because it looks like a skull. So some of it is the phenomenon. I don't think of the notion that there's quantum variability at the level of perception, like the idea that two people will look at the same orb that's been captured, the same orb of light that's been captured by a digital camera. One person will see the face of a Sasquatch in it, and one person will see nothing in it. I don't think that's it. I don't think it's a question of quantum indeterminacy or variability. I think it's a matter of perception, but I also think it may be cultural and social as well, in the sense that we have the example of when Western ships began visiting the New World, some Aboriginal people couldn't see the ships because they had never seen them before.
That's what I was referring to from What the Bleep.
Oh, right. Okay, that idea from What the Bleep I would definitely think has been operating here. People have had difficulty seeing life on Mars because they've never seen it before. And the Scorpion Man, for example, is as clear as any slightly blurry image of Mickey Mouse. I mean, it's a fully formed creature, but still people can't see it. This has required some growth on my part, some spiritual growth, because people's frustration factor. As a lawyer, I became a lawyer because Abraham Lincoln and Mohandas K. Gandhi were lawyers. I mean, those are the two figures in history that I admire the most. I was interested in using the law to try to bring about true democracy between people, fundamental justice, and the derivation and defense of the truth. That's why I was inspired to become a lawyer by lawyers like Lincoln and Gandhi. And I always used to think about their character and how so much of leading ultimately becomes tolerating other people's limitations and your own. But this was one of those challenges to me because I was leading efforts to bring about public disclosure of life on Mars, because I had to tolerate people who didn't believe it, people who were going to criticize me, who were going to condemn me for making that claim, who were going to tell me, look, I can't see what you see. So I had to strive to be a bigger person and tolerate the fact that not everybody in society was going to agree with my discovery, the surmises that underlay my discovery, and also some people were going to very, very unfairly attack me. And I've just decided to absorb those blows and move on, because I know ultimately that my discovery will be validated by other researchers and indeed accepted by society. The other factor, this is a critical factor, Alfred and I discussed this, and we really think we're identifying something that really hasn't been discussed at all in exopolitics or ufology. And that is that since the post-war saucer flap began, since, let's say, 1947, and through the motion pictures, for example, the 1950s and 60s about alien visitations to Earth, the mass media has been used, and I would say through the movies of the 1970s, like Close Encounter of the Third Kind, and then E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Even the best movies about extraterrestrials coming to Earth have been used in a way to condition the public to expect that first contact by human beings will forever remain an inevitable possibility that will never occur. Okay, so such moments have been dramatized in films like E.T. or like the very excellent film Contact. But the net assumption of such films and the way that mass media has been used to condition the public is to describe such an event, but also postulate it as a possibility that is both inevitable to occur and that will never occur. And an example of that was, in fact, E.T., where, what do you know? Henry, the human child, finds an E.T. in his backyard, but by the time E.T. is leaving Earth at the end of the movie, they've used an extraterrestrial's experience to do a retelling of the Gospels, telling of Jesus Christ's experience on Earth. And when E.T. is leaving Earth, his ship looks like a Christmas bulb, and they're leaving a stand of evergreen trees and going back to his planet. So E.T. has the extraterrestrial leaving planet Earth in a stand of Christmas trees in a fanciful environment, not in Henry's backyard with a swimming pool in Southern California. Okay, so if you look at the way that these films and other works in mass media have been architected, they both introduce to the public or reify the meme, if you will, that one day first contact will occur, but they also ultimately do a kind of a lateral placement of the event so that they position it in the mind of the public that it also will never occur. And we basically have identified this basically as a form of social conditioning to expect first contact, but also the fact that it will forever remain inevitable and never become dispositively so. Well, the problem is that first contact with extraterrestrial life forms began in January of 2008, when the Mars exploration rover Spirit that NASA placed on the home plate plateau of Mars in the inner basin of the Columbia Hills range of namely the West Valley of the Columbia Basin of Mars, began sending back images that contain dispositive evidence that Mars is inhabited. My paper basically summarizes or analyzes that dispositive evidence. So I still think, though, that people are having an inability to overcome the notion that Mars is inhabited because they've been conditioned to believe that first contact will someday occur, and that day will be never. Okay? The other issue, obviously, that's plying on some people's minds is their own religiosity. I mean, life on Mars, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which,